And so I have a few questions to sort of guide the conversation, but first tell us about your job and describe a typical day, activities, and then describe an unusual day. And I know you could do some of it about your present job, but you also have worked for the Weather Service. So, you can cover a lot of ground.
Okay, thank you, Uma. And thank you all for considering what I have to say. My current role, I am the Fire Weather Program Manager for Alaska. Doesn't that sound important? Manager doesn't imply that I have to work with people, which is kind of neat there. It's more of a program management operation. And I work with the wildland fire decision makers in the state of Alaska. My job actually right now is primarily communication. My job is it's secondarily meteorological decision making that does still play a role. But in this particular role, my job is to tell in a limited amount of time, a non-meteorologist, a group of non-meteorologists, the land managers, the wildfire crew bosses and such, give them the weather intel that will be relevant for them today and in the coming days, for them to succeed at their jobs of protecting Alaskans from wildfire. And so that's an interesting change for me. I worked for years in the National Weather Service, and on a typical day in that job, you're in an office with other weather nerds and you're talking amongst yourselves. Now I'm in a job where, assuming COVID ever ends, you are in an office and you are the only meteorologist among non-meteorologists around you, and they turn to you for weather guidance, and they will not understand 850 millibar isodrosotherm convergence or something like that. That's not useful for them at all, and they won't even believe it as an excuse when you try to explain, well, why didn't it rain yesterday and all that. So it can be it's a different operation to communicate with the non-specialist and to get them the details that they need, all in limited amount of time. There's a lot of time pressure. And so that's what I'm doing now, specifically at the fire service. In the morning, we do a number of briefings. And I like that. I'm a morning person. I grew up on the farm in North Dakota and have been getting up early ever since. And so it's heavy in the morning from about, I start at 6 and until about 11:30, it's pretty intense. And then the afternoon is more, unless there's a serious weather scenario in effect, you have data management, and that's when you catch up on your email. And there are some conference calls in the afternoons that we typically do. Regarding the meteorology, this was true, I think, when I was in the Weather Service long ago, and still true now. An operational forecaster has a 3-part job. Part 1, you get the info into your head. That means you look at the satellite imagery, the numerical models, the weather balloon data, all that stuff. You consider that, you put it in your head as quickly and efficiently as you possibly can, and you fit that to a conceptual model to understand, okay, now I know what's going on. Then part 2, after you've got all this important information in your brilliant head, part 2 is you make a meteorological decision. Like, okay, sure, it's sunny today, but tomorrow it will snow heavily. So you make that decision in your head. Now, once you've done that, you can't just put your feet up on the desk and be brilliant and content. You have to communicate effectively to the American public, which is who pays us and who we serve. And so you got to get the word out. And in my decades in operational meteorology, I have seen part 1 of that job, getting information into your head, become much more efficient. In the old days, you whippersnappers, you don't know what it was like. But we had, in the early 90s at the Fairbanks Weather Service, the radar data was on a dedicated computer for radar. The satellite was on a dedicated display for satellite. The models were on a printed paper that you inked up with markers and things like that. And you're wearing out the swivels and the casters on your chair going between these different monitors. And that was challenging when there was a thunderstorm on the satellite and on the radar, but they're on different screens. And you're trying to go, okay, is that one that one? Or is that one that other one? And nowadays, boy, you can put everything on one screen. It's more efficient now than it used to be to get a lot of information into your head quickly. So that's an improvement during my years in the business. Meteorological decision-making is still the same flawed human process it's always been, I guess, but conceptual models improve. And ideally, I heard this from a forecaster once, a forecaster, especially in a place like Alaska where terrain is tricky, a forecaster with 20 years experience is highly valuable. A forecaster with 1 year of experience repeated 20 times is not nearly so valuable. You will get burned. Being a weather forecaster in Alaska, you become 95% scar tissue. And so the trick is to learn from those experiences. Why is it windy in Delta and not windy in Fairbanks? What is going on? You learn from that and you become stronger over time. I think that's a really important part of the job, is learning from your failures. And actually, I got to say, some of the most frustrating experiences for me have been those cases where something happened that you weren't planning on, heavy snow over Nenana or whatever. And then afterwards, you and your forecaster friends, why did we miss that? And you go back and look at some of the maps and things, and it's frustrating when even afterwards, you can't find something that you want to look for next time. That does happen when you get burned and you don't learn from it. That's frustrating for me because you try to learn and get better all the time. So I guess that's the job in the Weather Service and the job in the Fire Service now. The second question here I see, Uma, that you had was, how'd you prepare for this job? What did you major in, your career path and such? And I am an example of failing upwards despite myself. I went to undergrad. I actually have a degree, believe it or not, in English literature. I went to undergrad with the intent of being the next Mark Twain, some kind of cerebral humorist of the times or something. But, that doesn't pay real good. And everyone wants to be the next Mark Twain, every English major in the world. Come on. And there ain't room for many Mark Twains. And I had an attack of pragmatism in my junior year of undergrad and thought, man, I don't know if that's going to pan out. Can I throw one dart and hit the same target overlapping in the Venn diagram, something I'm interested in and something that might be a job that I could actually get, a career. And I thought about weather. And so I finished my undergraduate degree in English, but all my electives were from junior year on were calculus, physics, and chemistry and all that. And I went to grad school then in atmospheric science, undergrad at little communist Grinnell College in Iowa, which I loved, great stimulating place. And then for grad school, Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And I was thinking then about research, and Colorado State cranks out all kinds of great researchers. And it didn't take me too long in grad school, not having an undergraduate degree in meteorology, to feel quite overwhelmed. And for that first year of grad school, I tell you what, if I had an uncle with a car dealership and he said, hey, Eric, you want to come sell cars for me? I might have done it. I really felt out of my element, but I was good at math, and I hung on and I sponged off of my fellow classmates who were smarter than me, tried to hang out around with them and ask them to explain stuff to me. And my graduate professor was a very kind and patient man. And he would explain things to me too when I came to him with questions. Never made me feel like an idiot. I just did that to myself. But by second year, it got better for me as I was learning more, and I had developed a framework upon which to apply new learning. I think the first year of grad school for me was just to build the framework, which I should have done in undergrad had I done that in meteorology, which I didn't. So I spun up quick there, and I realized another change there. I thought, maybe I'm not cut out for research. My advisor was a dynamicist, and I could follow along with all the equations, the primitive equations, and push them around. But man alive, those people there at Colorado State going into the PhD program, they just didn't push around the equations that we already knew about. They invented new equations. And I wasn't quite sure that I had that. And I thought about forecasting. And Colorado State is not a school known for cranking out forecasters, although there are some. but there was one of my fellow grad students had been in the Weather Service for a couple of years. And I took him out to lunch one day and I said, hey, tell me about those jobs and how do you get in? And this is the early 90s, way back when. So his info doesn't really apply to new people trying to get in now. But that was a very useful conversation for me to hear his perspective and to learn about some of the do's and don'ts of applying for jobs in federal service and all that. Well, one of the greatest days of my life was February 22nd, 1993. It was a Thursday, I think. And a meteorologist from Alaska Weather Service came to Colorado State to give a talk. And at the end of his talk, and mostly actually he focused on hydrology, but he said, hey, I'm here to present some of the Alaskan phenomenon for folks to look at. And I'm also here as a bit of a recruiter for, young, hungry student types. And after I recovered from my fainting spell, I went up and asked if we could talk later. And I talked with that guy's name was Jerry Nibbler. He was the state hydrologist for Alaska at that time. And I talked to him and he mentioned a student program for the Weather Service in Alaska. I applied and got the job for the summer of 1993, came to Fairbanks, and it changed everything for me. What if that hadn't happened? I'm not sure where I would be, but I came to Alaska in that summer, got the Alaska bug, went back then in the fall to finish up my grad work. And I got a phone call from Ann Barnes, Weather Service admin headquarters in Anchorage. And she said, hey, when do you graduate? And I said, well, yeah, I got to defend my thesis end of January. And she says, oh, okay, what day? January 28th. Well, what time? And like they needed people in Alaska. And this is some good career advice that I've always followed. And that is hit them where they ain't. Like, are you going to run straight forward into barbed wire and machine gun fire? No, they will kill you. Some jobs get 150 applicants. Jobs for Fairbanks get 3. And the odds are simply better, right? And so I used that. I grew up in North Dakota, and I put that back in the old days of cover letters when I applied for jobs in Alaska too. I wrote, I was born and raised in North Dakota. Nothing can kill me. And they sent me to Nome in 1994 in January or February by the time I got there. And I was launching balloons in blizzards, and it was wonderful. And in Nome, I was a meteorologist intern and doing data collection. And I think that's valuable for the person who then goes on to use data later. Having done data collection myself, I know about skeletons in the closet. Numbers look very clean on spreadsheets, but especially like depth of snow on ground, new fallen snow over the last 6 hours during a blizzard, how do you measure that to the nearest 1/10 of an inch? It's highly subjective, yet the parameter is in a spreadsheet and it looks great. Here in Fairbanks, it hardly ever, it's not windy when it snows. And so it's actually doable to measure snow to the nearest 1/10 of an inch every 6 hours. Not so in Nome or on the North Slope. And so there's noise in the data. And I feel like I gained an appreciation of that, again, accumulating the scar tissue by doing the job. I think that was very useful. I then was an intern briefly in the Anchorage Weather Service before coming back to Fairbanks again as a forecaster. And then I got spooked. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I had heard that if you start your life forecasting in Alaska with Weather Service, you might get stuck there, to say. That if you then a few years later apply for a job in Kansas City, they'll think, well, this guy doesn't know anything about tornadoes. No sale. And in the late 90s, the Weather Service had a big expansion. There were a lot of jobs available. So I applied for one in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And if Vladimir Putin ever takes Alaska back, I think Upper Michigan's not a place for all of us to emigrate to. And I was there for a couple of years, but I couldn't stay away. And I came back to Alaska in 2000 with the Weather Service in Fairbanks. I left the Weather Service in 2011. Then I worked at the university for a while, working as a product developer for new polar orbiter satellite imagery and a trainer, a liaison in the operations to research and research to operations feedback loop there. And here in Alaska, boy, the lower 48 is probably not going to help us. We have to help ourselves. And there is a lot of work being done here in the uniquely applicable weather parameters for Alaska, like polar orbiter satellite imagery for surveillance, not just feeding models. And I worked there at the university for a few years before then, in 2019, jumping back into operational forecasting with the fire service, where I've been since then, which is a lot of fun. I like that. And unlike the weather service, in the fire service, we only have day shifts. In the weather service, it's a 24-hour operation, and you work overnight, you work the daytime, you work the evening, and they keep scrambling you around. And some people can handle that. I could not, or it just killed me off. And so that's one of the reasons I'm not in the weather service right now, is that they tried to murder me with the rotation over the clock. It's quite inhuman. I understand the need for it, though. You know, tornadoes don't care what time of day it is. You have to have people on those scopes watching and doing the job. Well, I keep on it babbling. So that's my bizarre career path for an English major gone wrong. And tell us something about your hobbies and other life outside meteorology. Well, you might see here in this room, there's some drums and guitars and ukuleles around. I'm a musical hobbyist. That's another thing that I thought about, where you could throw a dart. I mean, but Eddie Van Halen already existed, you know, and how am I going to displace him? So being a rock star didn't look like a real career, but it's been a fun hobby. I've even been learning these last few years to sing less badly, which has, and I've made a lot of progress because I started from zero. And that's been really fun. I find music to be a really rewarding hobby. And I'm finally glad that my mom made me take piano lessons in 4th grade. That kind of started me on the understanding of musical vocabulary, which later on turned out to actually be useful. And my wife and I played Dungeons and Dragons here a lot during the COVID era with some friends around Alaska and even in the lower 48. That's neat. We have some dogs, and I've learned to ski jor with huskies and German shepherds even. And that's really neat. You know, I think one thing I have in common with Adolf Hitler is that most of my best friends are dogs, apparently. And skiing too, Alaska, you know, for cross country and downhill. Actually, my spouse and I, Deanne, we met way back in the late 90s when we were training to be volunteer first aid ski patrollers at Moose Mountain ski hill northwest of town. And we're still doing that even to this day. And that's a fun hobby too. Sure, it's about skiing, but you know, once or twice a year, you get to really help somebody out of a tough spot. Somebody who's off the trail and has a broken leg wrapped around a birch tree. And you're the person that gets that person, you know, you and your team get that person down the hill into the ambulance, you know, so the pros can really help them. And I have found that to be rewarding. In the same sense, my summer jobs during college, I was a lifeguard and taught swimming lessons at this tiny lake there in northern Minnesota, which is a great area. And, you know, the older I get too, I wonder if maybe some of the most important stuff I've done with my life might be having just taught people to swim, because that can save your life. If you can go 50 yards swimming, that could pay off. And I think that's very important. Okay, enough about me. Lastly, the question, what advice would you give students who might be thinking of a career related to forecasting? Wow, what a great question. And I might answer that by saying that it's tough to answer specifically, because the relationship between machines and humans in the forecast process is a moving parameter. And humans are still magically capable in ways that machines aren't, but the machines are changing. What is the best applied role of human intelligence in the future? And I think we recognize patterns. We we understand concepts that might be occurring below the spatial and temporal resolution of a numerical model. And the most important model is the conceptual model, I think. And only the human really gets that. And as I babbled on earlier about my job in the fire business right now, it's more about communication than forecasting for what I do now. I still talk with the Weather Service, especially on the busy days. We make decisions together, but my job is primarily communication, and I see that trend continuing. This is referred to as decision support. More broadly, let's say you're the governor of some state on the eastern seaboard, and here comes a hurricane. And you want to know, all right, do I have to issue an evacuation order for counties? And how bad, what are the odds of the weather getting really bad in what places? And this person is not a forecaster, maybe not even used to probabilistic thinking. And so you as a meteorologist are trying to help this person make the best decision possible. And you need to communicate with that non-meteorologist using words that are meaningful, relevant, and not opaque with scientific gobbledygook that doesn't help other people. So I think that is the future, is decision support. And when I was graduating from college, there was this term meteorological cancer. And the fear then was that MOS, model output statistics, the existence of MOS, and it was pretty good, would allow forecasters to lean on the MOS, and the forecasters would thus be able to slide and get by with performing better without really understanding. And I think that concept could be expanded now to the models that we have that are better than ever before. But if the human being is to remain relevant in the forecast process, the human being has to understand the concepts and communicate them effectively. When I first started in the Weather Service in the early 90s, the old guys on the forecast desk then, they had begun forecasting before there was satellite imagery. And they knew how to extract every piece of meaningful info about, a pressure dip and rise at a given surface site. Because that's what they had, and they squeezed every drop of meteorological goodness out of the data they had. Now we have too much data, and that's a different problem. Every generation of forecasters will have their own challenges and their own way to meet the need of the public and the decision makers that we try to support. So that, I think, is the future. And then maybe this might seem off topic, but in my years, I have seen people succeed and fail. And I think you cannot underestimate the impact of, even though it's not weather, just soft skills. Be punctual. In the Weather Service, when you show up to work, you're relieving your predecessor. So don't be late. That will anger your predecessor. And when you're the predecessor, don't leave your reliever a messy workspace. Be tidy in your workspace, because we all share the same desks and all that. Be punctual, be tidy. When the phone rings, be courteous on the phone. Just don't pick it up and go, yeah, you can't do that. And you need to be a team member. And this can be really challenging for some folks. For me, I fell right into it, but be a team leader too. Be able to go, can you do this? You do that. I know right now this is unprecedented because, whatever computer just crashed and we just got a report of flooding in Salcha, so we got to handle this. So do this, do that, do that. Think on your feet and direct people. That's important as you rise through the ranks in the Weather Service to become a lead forecaster. And maybe most importantly, maintain functionality under pressure. Time pressure, phenomenon pressure. When you see, there was a story, and this is years ago, but in Des Moines, Iowa, a severe thunderstorm. Well, there was a line of storms going across Iowa, and all the forecasters in the Des Moines office, they're there handling the event. And these people, by the way, live there too. And here's this line of storms just tearing apart the whole community, and it kills their radar. So now they have no radar imagery, and they cannot give up. The show will go on. and they maintained their warning coverage using satellite and lightning data for that half hour or 45 minutes while the radar was down until it came back up. And that's the kind of spirit operational meteorology requires. You get the job done. Even when you know you might be wrong, you have to press the send button on that forecast. I guess that requires a certain amount of arrogance, but perfection not only is not required, it's not available. You have to simply get the job out there the best you can with a limited amount of information that is internally inconsistent, and you have time pressures, and you still have to put your name on the bottom of a forecast and send it out. And that's an important thing, functionality under pressure for operational meteorology. And with that, I am all out of brilliant notes to read from. So yeah, thank you, Uma, for letting me babble. Was there anything else that I did not cover there?
That was just awesome. It was just, thank you very much, Eric, for taking the time and telling us your story. I've known you all these years. I didn't realize you started out as an English major.
Well, I try to hide it, you know.
No, but I suspect that your that experience explains your ability to communicate so well.
Well, I think it does help. You know, communicating effectively in writing and verbally is an increasingly important aspect of all science jobs. And I think my experiences, I cannot write them off as having been entirely a misstep. I have some background that other folks lack. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And